Hello, this is Ulisse Kodorobe. Today's date is December 3rd, 2018. This is the video exercise required for the section covering the axial and appendicular skeleton section. So, in my hand here, I have the skeletal model provided with the lab kit, and I'm going to use it as my model to point out the required parts for this section. Alright, starting with the anterior skull, we have the frontal bone, the ethmoid bone, we also have the lacrimal bone, right next to the ethmoid bone. We also have the zygomatic on both sides. We also have the nasal, the very front. We also have the vomer, maxilla, which is the upper jaw, as well as the mandible, which is the lower jaw. For the posterior skull, we have the parietal, the temporal on the sides. We also have the occipital in the back, as well as the mandible can also be visible for this section. For the lateral skull, we have the frontal, the parietal, the temporal. We also have the occipital, the nasal, the very front. If you look carefully, we can also see a bit of the ethmoid. We also see the maxilla and the mandible, which again is the upper and lower jaw respectively. For the inferior section of the skull, that are known as the floor of the cranial cavity, we have essentially the same parts, just from a different angle. So the occipital is still in the back, the parietal, the sides, since this is a kind of a transverse cut. So we've got the parietal for most of the sections. We've got the temporal covering the sections closer to the front. The frontal, of course. The ethmoid you can see from here, and the sphenoid will be on the outside for us there. Next, we're going to take a quick look at the vertebral column. At the very top, the first cervical vertebrae is the atlas. The second is called the axis. The cervical vertebrae are the first 7 vertebrae. The next 12 are the thoracic vertebrae. And the ones below that, until the sacrum, are the lumbar vertebrae. Below the lumbar is the sacrum, and below that is the coccyx. And that covers the vertebral column. The thoracic cage is composed also of a few parts, but mostly ribs. We've got a bunch of ribs known as true ribs. True ribs are ribs that connect directly to the sternum or the manubrium. The body of the sternum is this middle section right here. The manubrium is the section of the sternum at the top. We've also got something called false ribs. False ribs are any ribs that do not directly connect to the sternum, or the body of the sternum rather. That would be these 3 here, and the bottom 2 floating ribs as well are also considered false ribs. Alright, next we're going to take a quick look at the pectoral girdle and the upper limb in general. The pectoral girdle is composed of the scapula, which you can see right here, the clavicle, which is this bone right here. The rest of the upper limb is the humerus, the radius, which radiates outward in the anatomical position, and also the ulna, which is the one right here. Further down, we are going to have a quick look at the wrist and hand of this skeleton model here. At the edges of our hand here are the phalange. Once we reach the actual hand section beyond the fingers, Those are metatarsals. Sorry, metacarpals. Metatarsals are the feet. And some of those sections around those areas have small little bones similar to kneecaps called sesamoid bones. Below that are the wrist bones. There's 8 in total, and the first 4 are we've got the one starting from the, it's kind of hard to see in the video, but the ones here, I'll twist it like so. Not a very detailed picture, I know. The one closer to the wrist is going to be the trapezoid, starting from the thumb, and next to it is the trapezium. Below that is the scaphoid. Next to the scaphoid is the lunate. Next to the lunate, all the way to the left, is the pisiform. And there's a small little wedge there between the lunate and the pisiform. That's actually the triquetrium. It's very small from this angle. And above those are the hamate and the capitate. And that's the best we can do with this. It's a very small model, so detail's going to be a bit lacking. Alright, moving on. Next, we're going to move on to the pelvic girdle and the lower limbs. The pelvic girdle consists of the ischium, which is this section right here. Oh, sorry. The ischium is actually the lower loop. The ilium is this section right here. The ischium is this lower little loop, and the pubic bone is this section right here. For the actual lower limb, we've got the femur. Beyond that, we've got the patella, then we've got the tibia, the fibula, and for the ankle and foot, we have a similar situation similar to that of the wrist and hand there. Namely, we start at the ends with the phalanges, then we've got the metatarsals, and then we've got a bunch of ankle bones here. The calcaneus is the one in the back. The talus is the one right below the tibia here. Beyond that is the navicular. Then we've got the cuboid on this side. The lateral, cuneiform, and the intermediate cuneiform are right next to each other. And last but not least, at the end is the medial cuneiform. And that completes our video exercise. Thank you.